Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I wanted to reflect for a few minutes on the whole idea of the perfect family. And I know that, especially here in the US for a while, historically in the past, when we talk about TV programming, there was always this concept of the perfect family. And there was a period of time where a lot of what was presented on TV was an example or a model of a family that many people couldn't necessarily relate to. And so it created problems for some people because they thought that they had to be that family. And then programming began to change a little bit, and there was always this debate in this country, in this culture, about how to present the family. So there was this idea of the family that was divorced. Then there was the concept of, okay, not all families are European American. So then there was the idea of presenting the African American family. And then there was different types of European American families that were presented, different types of African American families that were presented. So the question of the perfect family has been a question that has been a discussion amongst the non-Muslims for a long time. I think that we as Muslims are beginning to discuss this question. But I wanted to say this, that there's a lot of things that we can take from this sort of conversation. I'm not going to even attempt to cover everything in detail. I just want to put certain things out there, share some ideas, come back to them, leave people to reflect a little. If we were to just take up the idea of the concept of the divorced woman as part of the discussion on the perfect family, when we look at, for instance, the idea of the divorced woman, or the idea of the woman that has been married multiple times, if we go back all the way to the prophetic time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the son of Abdullah alaihis salatu wasalam, we find that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam began to change that understanding of the value of that woman. And in the early generation, the generation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his disciples or his companions, we see that the idea of marrying the woman that has been married before or has been in a relationship before, that idea was not an idea that was off the table. It was an idea that was practiced, and we find many of the companions, they married each other, they divorced each other, and they continued with life. So that's just an example to put it on the table of how it is that we may have a conception of the perfect family in today's time that may impact a certain percentage of the Muslim Ummah negatively. Like, for instance, the divorced woman. In some cultures in the Muslim community is acceptable, no problem. And in others, in a good many, is very problematic. And even the late Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali, Dr. Muhammad Ghazali from Al-Azhar al-Sharif, he talked about how it was that women were what? That women were, he talked about how that women were almost given a death sentence in the Muslim community. They were treated as though they are to die, and that's how it is that the divorced woman is dealt with, the widow, and so on and so forth. Not necessarily in Islamic practice. Okay, let's put that to the side. So that's something that has to be investigated. Now, I want to give a couple minutes to this and then put an end to this because of time and so on and so forth. We have many models of the concept of family in the Quran. We have some models of the struggling family, and we have some models of the struggling family means here that the family is struggling with the issue of Iman. So you can have one family member that may be a person of Iman and the other family member may be against the deen. Then you have the idea of the family that strives together for iman, that strive together for deen. And you have the idea of one person being righteous in the family and is struggling with the rest of the family. So you have the idea of the prophets themselves, whether it's Nuh or Yaqub or Muhammad or Lot, alaihis salam jami'an. You have these models of people that are struggling with families that are not perfect. As a matter of fact, you find that on many occasions within the model of the family in which a prophet exists, that there's opposition. And there is at times people within those families that are just straight outright, that go against the deen. Right? And so you have, like, for instance, the family of Abu Lahab, who's from the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he's the evil uncle that plots and strategizes against the well-being of a family that is righteous. That's the problem. And then you have the example of Abu Talib. Abu Talib is the righteous uncle that, for the sake of simplicity, because I know that there's some complex issues that come to this, but for the sake of simplicity, is considered the non-Muslim uncle that supports the deen. And he supports his Muslim nephew. He supports his righteous nephew, but he never becomes Muslim, so to speak. Just leave it with that example, because I know that that story has its own complexities and its own back and forth in the Muslim community. And then you have the whole example of Maryam alayhi salam. Maryam is the righteous single mother. Okay, it's more complicated than that, because we know that Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, was created. It was her son and so on and so forth, and that was a miraculous situation. But the idea of this woman that is by herself and is with her son and raising her son, it's not the concept that we have of the perfect family. Even, we have to at times bring ourselves to the level of earth. Yes, that's supposed to be a miraculous situation and so on and so forth, but the Quran is not a text or a book. It's the speech of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala that is presented, communicated to us so that we can reflect. It's not just average book. It's not just a novel. It's not a psychological book, a sociological book, you know what I'm saying, that doesn't have roots that in basis in revelation. Right? The Quran is revelation without going into the complexities of that. And so we come to the Quran and we come to these models and we come to these examples, and we have to really put ourselves in a situation to reflect with more depth. To reflect with more depth as to what's going on in these different scenarios. Because if we're able to do that, we're able to have not only a sociological lesson on the family and Iman, not only an understanding of how societies have worked, but we can have an understanding of how it is that families have worked throughout time and the dynamics of Iman in those families and what it is that people as human beings struggle with. Because we're not talking about beings that are not human beings. We're not talking about the angels, and we're not talking about the jinn, and we're not talking about the beaver family, and we're not talking about the deers and the birds, and we're talking about human beings. And so the Quran gives us this understanding of how it is that these dynamics play themselves out. And there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on the state of the heart and the spirit and dealing with situations of hardship and ease. And so then the Quran opens the door for us. For what? Opens the door for us to be able to reflect at a deeper level. So that's something that is important. The psychological level, we reflect upon it at a deeper level, but it gives us the gateway. It's not going to give us a lot of details. It's going to give us the principles. So, for instance, in Yaqub's situation, alayhi salatu wasalam, his children, he has some children that are extremely unruly, disobedient, and some of them are straight out criminal in intent. And then he has his pious son, Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. And so, Yaqub, we begin to see in Yaqub a sense of a broken heart. Does that mean we stop there and we say, well, in Islam, And in deen and in iman, you only stay in that state. No, the Quran is giving us the gateway to begin to reflect upon what that means and the levels of it. And that's why people like Imam al-Balkhi rahmatullahi alayh, in Sustenance of the Soul, he takes that whole idea of huzn, or the downtrodden state of the heart, and the idea of depression and anxiety and all that, and he builds that out. But the Quran itself is giving us the dynamic, not of a person that is in necessity of having to address trauma. Or you're talking about the state of a person that's spiritual, that has this role to play in the family, that's going through some struggles. So it's giving us the basics, the basis, right, to be able to begin to address mental health issues as well as spiritual issues and family dynamics. The Quran encourages us towards knowledge. So we have that basic framework that is there to understand. Sorry, because they're testing out the sound system in the masjid. And so then from here, we are able to move forward in our analysis. But we shouldn't have the foundational lesson that I want to take from this and close out is that we shouldn't have an idea of a perfect family that doesn't exist, right? We even with the best model that we have, which is the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. So we see in that model, we have the model of what? We have the model of a family that is striving in iman, but still has to deal with other issues, right? And that's the model of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wife, and we can even say wives. Which even with that example, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives, it's not the idea of family that we have today, but we have within it the idea of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, the Prophet Muhammad and Khadija, right? And then we have the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives. So we have even within that the framework, and even in that context, we have Khadija alayhi salatu radiallahu anha, who's older than the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And we have Aisha, right? Even though it's not harmful to say alayhi salatu wasalam in general, but just to clarify. And so then, for instance, we have the example of Aisha, and Aisha is younger. So we see this, and we have the idea of the Christian wife and the Jewish wife coming into the deen, and we have the idea, of different ranges, different situations, age ranges, different situations. That's why this stuff has to be studied, so that we break our minds out of this idea of what we think the perfect family is. The Quran is giving us principles to deal with family life. So we ourselves, we bring limitations in how it is that we conceptualize things, because we're not reflecting profoundly and deeply in the right way, holistically, on the lives of the prophets and what are these models, alayhimus salam, for us. What does it mean for us? The qasas of the Quran, or the stories of the Quran, are an essential part of communicating information. The story form of communicating information in the Quran is giving us what is necessary at the most basic level, because there's a specific set of messages or a key message to be sent. But that doesn't mean that the story ends with that. There's other angles that we can reflect on. It opens up the door. But the story model is giving us a certain type of delivery. The story model is not like the legal model. And so the Quran is teaching us how to reflect upon things in various ways. That's why I want to end definitely with this, that's why drama is extremely important in the arts. Because when we have the character development and the character display and the character relationships in the context of a story, we're able to see something that's operational. Muslims are not seeing themselves. And that's why the profound nature of a character, the psychological dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics, the how you deal with and how you overcome situations or how you problem solve, we ourselves are not seeing ourselves in those dynamics. And so what's happening is that we are modeling ourselves after other models that are not models that are rooted in the concept of how do you work with revelation while you live and you exist in this dimension, right, of life, which is planet Earth. So that's something to reflect upon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.